Hello and welcome to Let's Unpack That. It's a podcast where we, two college grads, analyze, I haven't done this in too long. We analyze stuff that we read in middle school. We're reading Twilight.
Let's get ready to podcast! Come on. Did you hear that?
Oh my goodness. How did you do that?
It's on my iPad.
Okay, can I just say that your setup is the most elaborate?
It is the most elaborate. You're welcome.
You've got your phone, which you're using as a microphone, and doing the ham horn over me with your iPad, where you also have your notes, and then you have Skype on your computer.
I know. And you know what's disgusting is that they're all Apple products.
Ha, I have a PC.
It's okay. It's fine. It's fine.
So we're talking about chapters 15 and 16 of Twilight today. Mm-hmm. Last time we had a really heavy and research-heavy episode, but today I'd say we have a bit of a lighter episode. I didn't do as much research, though I did try to find stuff on the history of khaki. It just wasn't that interesting.
But there was history of khaki that was to be found.
Yeah, but it's mostly military.
Well, I had fun. I found out that there's an official illustrated Twilight guide, and my inner 12-year-old girl started screaming because apparently it's full of all these backstories and details that Meyer didn't include when she originally wrote the series, and I'm sure she just was pulling it out of her ass as she was writing it, because it came out, like, not long ago, actually.
Oh, really? Because this week I dipped into the gender swap version, which came out for the 10th anniversary.
So the official illustrated guide came out in 2011.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and so that first book came out in 2005, and the series ended, I think, in 2008? I went to a midnight release party for that, actually. I was in California with my friend Danielle at the time, and we just went and did a Breaking Dawn midnight release party. And it was great. It was at Barnes & Noble. Her mom let us buy spray and dye for our hair so we could dye our hair red. It was great. Oh, we had so much fun. Oh, and then we got our books like first up, and it was great. What a good time. And
Wow.
then however many handful of years later, I went and did a midnight release for The Cursed Child, the screenplay. When that came out, I was in Scotland for that one. So that was cool. I was in Edinburgh.
I don't think I've ever been to a midnight book release.
No?
No, and I don't think I've ever been to a midnight movie release either.
I've been to a 10 p.m. movie release. That was like early screening.
I don't know. I might be forgetting. I forget which movies I've seen in the theater because I never go see movies anymore. Yeah, I would love to be so excited about a book that I go to its midnight release. And I feel like that doesn't happen a lot as we get older. There aren't many books like targeted toward us that we know about and are so hyped to see released. Like in our era, it was mostly Twilight and Harry Potter, but now that we're older, what book series are our generation and our fellow people
becoming by
really
Michelle
invested
Obama?
In? I don't know. I didn't hear anything about a midnight release or anything.
No.
Like, what I'm talking about is like people waiting in costumes by the door, like lined up around the block. There hasn't been a big sensation like that.
Not in book form. I would argue Hamilton, some of the Fantastic Beasts movies, Avengers definitely, I think, is having a lot of hype, especially with Endgame coming up.
I don't know. What will be the next book?
What will be the next book?
Let me tell you, it's certainly not the gender-swapped version of Twilight, because that thing is a yikes moment in
Are
itself.
you reading it, like, in its entirety?
No, because I've decided not to put myself through that hell. I think I committed enough when I said that I would watch more of the movies. Mm-hmm. The reason I skimmed these 2 chapters was because we get so much of Carlisle's story, and I was wondering how they changed it with Carlisle being a woman in the gender-swapped version. And first of all, gender-swapped names, they're not on point in that version.
Oh, really?
Alice is Archie.
I know. I hate that. I saw what you sent me over Snap, and it's the stupidest thing I've ever heard.
Edward is Edith with a Y.
Edith.
Although it's not always spelled that way.
What, really?
Yeah, in the conversation with Jessica, I don't know what she is, it's spelled with an I. And Jessica's like, oh, those are the Cullens. That's Edith, and it's spelled with an I. I don't know if that's a mistake. I might have just caught a typo. There's a lot to talk about with the swap of Carlisle specifically.
I'm so excited to hear what you have to say.
I think we both found the character of Carlisle really interesting in these 2 chapters. And we learned so much about him.
I love Carlisle. Let's start talking about this because I have so much to say.
Yeah, let's get into it. All right, so chapter 15. Bella is super giddy in the morning because Edward stayed all night. She eats breakfast in front of him and jokes that she could be his breakfast, which is awkward.
And scary.
And then they go to the Cullens' house, which is old and Victorian on the outside, and on the inside is all modern and clean and white. And so Bella meets the parents and officially meets all of the siblings. And we get a lot of information about each of them.
Not all of the siblings. There are 2 noticeably missing.
Yeah.
Rosalie and Emmett do not appear in this chapter. The stated reason being that Rosalie is in fact jealous of Bella and does not like her. And Emmett is just following his woman.
Want to take a guess as to what Rosalie's name in the...
Roger.
Royal.
No.
It's Royal.
That's really bad. Because I'm pretty sure... Oh, okay. All right. I was worried because, again, one of those stories that we don't really hear much about is Rosalie's death. She was engaged to this guy named Royce King II. And the reason she was turned was because he essentially saw her coming home while he was out drunk with a bunch of his friends, and he grabbed her, and he and his friends all gang raped her and beat her essentially to death until Carlisle came and found her. So I was concerned because I'm like, Royal is definitely the name of her fiance that beat her to death. But actually, it's not. It's Royce, so we're fine.
Still pretty similar.
It's very similar, and it's very concerning.
Ugh.
Anyway, added to the list of bad bitches that I love is Rosalie. Sorry. All right, but let's also talk about the fact that they wake up in the morning after Edward has, watched her all night, and she, throws herself at him in the morning. Edward goes, "Is me your boyfriend?" and has no chill. Bella goes, "You're more than my boyfriend." And I need to move on from the whole idea of they just met. Why are they that ship has sailed? I get it. I need to stop beating this horse. They just met, but they're in love and they love each other and they want to spend forever together. That's fine. I get it. But at the same time, I'm still you guys just fucking
chill.
Chill. Be more chill. As someone who is always told to be more chill, you need to chill. For the love of God. And what is more than a boyfriend? What?
Yeah, they aren't explicitly engaged. What is that? What is that?
I mean, I guess maybe boyfriend in the sense of casual relationships, kind of how we talked about last week or 2 weeks ago or whenever the fuck, but being in a serious committed relationship.
But what do you call that? I mean, we should have a word for it. Other cultures probably have a word for it, where it's you're casually dating, and then you're committed dating, and then you're long-term dating, and you know it. It hasn't been a long time, though.
Yeah.
And also, later on in this conversation, she says, "I'll always want you." I warned him.
Always want you.
Forever.
Forever.
And now I'm afraid for Edward because she just wants his vampire venom seed inside of her.
I mean, let's be honest. Don't we all?
No, we don't, Nina. We don't.
No, we don't. In any case, what another great moment this chapter brings us is the khaki skirt. The khaki skirt of indecency.
Legendary.
And seduction.
Mormon culture.
And temptress.
But make it fashion. Call Tyra Banks right now.
I'm calling her. Tyra, you won't believe. Yes, I love her. What does she do? Is it out and then in? Or is it in and then out?
It's out and then in.
Bring it in.
Yeah.
Mormon culture,
but make it fashion.
Am I the only one fondling my breasts as I do this? I'm boobs out and in and out. And
bend and snap.
Snap. Yes. I'm so happy. Anyway, it's very exciting. But I mean, heck, if I can be sexy in sweatpants, why can't the rest of us be sexy in a khaki skirt?
I don't know. It doesn't bother me that it's a khaki skirt. It bothers me that it's a long khaki skirt, and I can envision the, like, kind of ruffles in it. Like, you know how there's those skirts that, like, have layers, and it looks like several pieces of fabric, like, sewn below one another? Like, yeah. I can imagine that. That is very early 2000s, and I do not like it.
I pictured it as one long khaki skirt, like, maybe with, like, a little... Not even like a slip, but like it cut away a little bit on the bottom just so she can walk in it. Yeah. But otherwise a long, just khaki skirt and a blue blouse.
Yeah.
So.
Even so, I don't get it. I don't get how it's sexy in any way.
It's utterly indecent.
Yeah, how is it utterly indecent? I don't know a lot about fabric, but I do know enough to know that khaki, like denim, does not lend itself well to long skirtdom. It isn't flexible enough. It's too heavy to flow. It's straight and hides curves. You end up looking like a block.
Yeah.
Which is probably why a lot of modest fashion in the early 2000s liked it. But I don't understand why it's sexy. Like, the reason that those exist is to not be sexy. The reason that it's so prevalent in modest fashion is to not be sexy, to not tempt the boys.
Well, if Edward loved that khaki skirt, just wait until he sees yoga pants.
Oh, God. Twilight re-envisioned for the 2010s.
But then again, if you think about it, when Edward died, it was the 19th century, and, like, women were wearing those long skirts, and so maybe her wearing that and him seeing her wearing that was like a throwback for him.
You know what just occurred to me?
What?
He died just in time to miss out on the 20s.
Yeah, he did. And World War II. Or World War I.
No, he didn't miss World War I. Not all of it.
When did we get... Well, I thought we didn't enter the war until 1919.
I thought it ended in 1919. Hold on, let me look this up.
No. Who knows?
It began in 1914 and lasted until 1918. So would he have been... No, he was too young to have been conscripted.
Yeah.
But he would have lived through it.
That would have been an interesting thing to add on to that. Add on to his story of like, oh yeah, not only did I die during the influenza, but I saw the, like, country go to war for, you know, the First World War. Like, that's crazy.
I don't know about you, but if it were me growing up, going through World War I, knowing that it's the Great War, and that hoping that it's the only one of its kind, and then having to go through World War II and not being able to do anything about it, and then living through and seeing all the patterns that we see repeating today, I would be, like, off my rocker.
I mean, that would be enough to convince me not to be a vegetarian vampire. Like, you fuckers keep on making the same mistakes over and over again. What are you doing? What are you doing?
Can I get philosophical for a second?
Absolutely.
Do you think if human life were extended by about an average of 50 years, we would learn from more of our mistakes? Or do you think that we would make the same mistakes, just maybe with more time between them?
I don't know. It would depend on a few factors, such as like when people retire, when people start having children. Because if our life expectancy increased, then I would assume that people get married and have children later. That's kind of how it's been the natural progression of life. Like the longer we live, the later in life people are starting to have kids. So, you know, would it make all the difference that 50 years? Because if we pushed it back, that might just push back the age of having kids. And so the generational gap might not be that different. Do you know what I mean?
Like, you might add another 10 years, but it would still be a comparable gap.
I'm not sure if it would make that much of a difference, like, because we would still have the same people who are, like, for example, if we lived right now 50 years longer, it would still be the same people who are currently older than us running the country. They may just be living a little bit longer. Am I making sense? Like, it feels like it would just be kind of like this continuum of just jumping 50 years, but do we really have the capacity to learn? It's not so much, I think, age-wise. I think it's our ability to listen. and to recognize it.
You don't think an extra 50 years would do it?
I'm not convinced that it would.
Oh.
Especially if we had people living longer. I'm thinking almost exclusively of Congress right now.
Yeah.
And how we have so many very older, like just older people in Congress who are so out of touch with the younger generations. And thank God we're starting to get some younger people in there. But at the same time, imagine if they were still good for another 40 years and how further disconnected they would be.
Yeah. So then on the flip side, if human life were shortened by 30 or 40 years, do you think that we would be better off and that we would be more able to accept change?
That's an interesting thought. I don't know if I quite have an answer. My first instinct is to say yes, but then I kind of want to ponder that idea a little bit. Because I feel like maybe yes, but then there is also like, hey, life is short, fuck it, let's do whatever.
Right, we won't be around to see the next generation, so why should we do anything?
I don't know, I think I just have very little faith in humanity at this point, that I'm like,
understandable.
nothing can save us.
Time alone can't save us.
It's not an issue of time.
Anyway, surfacing back from that.
That was fun. Also, I hate breathing. I especially hate breathing while kissing. That's the worst. Like, stop breathing when you're kissing me. Just stop it.
And again, there's no downside to being a vampire. You can breathe underwater. You don't have to breathe. Oh my goodness. This is another thing. If I were a vampire, and maybe if being a vampire made me lose my fear of the ocean, I would go, like, deep sea diving in the Bermuda Triangle and, like, find some shit.
How did we live for 4 years on the beach and I didn't know you had a fear of the ocean?
We didn't go to the beach very often. Like, here's the thing. I can be on the beach. It's fine. But I don't go swimming in the ocean. And, like, I hate anything slimy, like seaweed touching me, or, like, the potential of there being something on the bottom that's not solid rock or sand, like that's a crab or something. I don't like the slimy things, and I am afraid of currents, and I just don't want to swim in the ocean.
So after this whole kind of shebang of how utterly indecent she looks in her fucking khaki skirt and blouse, we arrive at the house of the Coven. We arrive at the Cullen Coven. TM. I was really fascinated when I reread this book and I saw that it was actually described as being a very old house, being like a 100-year-old house that kind of has like this Victorian Gothic style. And I pictured it actually a lot like Bella's house in the movie. It's supposed to be older. It's modern on the inside. They've taken out a wall and there's a lot of light and a lot of just like open concept. But on the outside, it's still very antique, which I found to be incredibly fascinating when you look at the modern house in the movie, because when you go to the modern house, it's so different than the rest of Forks, Washington. You're driving through Forks in the first couple scenes of Twilight, and you see it's older. Bella's house, the one that she shares with Charlie, is older. The high school itself looks like it was built in the 50s. It's not a modern town. Most of the diner that they eat in is older. It's all very antique, very
rustic.
It's very reminiscent of an earlier time. And then you're even talking about, we have the Indian reservation, which holds on to that history. So that history hasn't really left the part of the peninsula. But then you drive in and you're suddenly at this very modern home, especially in the 2008 era. How modern that house was in the movie, of like glass and black and white and like lighter browns and contrasting wood and very open, and it's gorgeous. It's actually a real home. It's actually a home that's in Portland that the movie was able to film at. The owners were allowed them to come in and film there for a couple days. And I think it was up until the fourth one that they were able to film in that house in Portland. But then they had to rebuild it on a sound set somewhere. And that was just something I was looking at. Because what I really wanted to look into was, why would they give the Cullens such a modern house versus like the classic kind of style? Like, what is giving them a modern home established? It shows a status of them being very wealthy and being very above the rest of the human population, but it really hides their identity, because at the core of it, they're not modern. They're not from this time. They're all from another time period, and it alienates them further because one, that house is so big and new, but the rest of the town is not. You know, it's putting up this false front that they're trying to achieve there of like being like, okay, we're modern, we're here, we're rich, we're fancy, and like they absolutely are allowed to be, but in terms of wanting to stay subtle and low-key and not bring attention to themselves, sure, the house itself is way off in the woods in the middle of nowhere, but at the same time, when they have people over, like Bella, and then they start having people over in the third and fourth books, it's like, to me, it kind of ruins this vision of like, you know, they're older on the outside, but on the inside, they're attempting to be modern, which is kind of, it's kind of a mirror of how they are to the outside population. It's almost an exact reversal, how on the outside they're trying to be modern and new, but on the inside they're still people that come from 1600s, the 1900s, you know, the 50s, the 20s. Like they're not modern people. Mm-hmm. And the change of the house really struck me for some reason because it was just so different. And I think it just stands to be a really big marker that excludes them further. And in my personal opinion, I think the older house suits them better because, you know, it's updated on the inside with the walls and the light that can give them their own, you know, give them kind of their own way of dealing with their transformations into modernity. And it's the one place that they don't have to hide. But it makes no sense to give them this huge ornate mansion even when then they're the middle of nowhere because that's just not who they are. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean. I think it makes sense both ways to me. Because this is the house that they built the first time they were here. Mm-hmm. That the outside would be fitting in and the inside would be more customized to their interests. And like showing how old they are. But with the movie, I can also see how that would make sense because you can tell looking at some of them and hearing them speak that they're not from this time. And so I think the house could serve to offset that because like they all have like, old names and it's like this family is a little weird and a little timeless because they never change their appearances, they never age or anything. And so if somebody were to notice that, I could see the house being something like, oh, we're just modern people. Like, we're just a little odd for the area. We're just a little fashion forward instead of, oh, we're from the 1600s. Mm-hmm. So I can see how it would work both ways, but I do agree that the Victorian on the outside and all modern and customized on the inside makes more sense.
Yeah, it just, I don't know. And I don't know why it bugged me because it felt like, not that it cheapened the Cullens, I guess, but it just stood to put them on this higher place that they weren't trying to get. It served to put them on a pedestal of like this bougie-ass, wealthy lookout point, when that's not what they've been trying to do throughout the book. They're trying to blend in. They're trying to stay quiet. They're trying to just go to school and get the hell out of there. Mm-hmm. That's why that makes sense.
Since this is the one place where they don't have to blend in, the house might be that. If they want a modern house, they can have a modern house because they have the money.
And once we get into the house, modern or not, we meet for the first time Esme Cullen.
Yeah.
And I first started to look up Esme. I wanted to know what the silent movie film actresses were, what Bella was picturing. So I went and pulled that up. They're gorgeous. You know, you can just tell that Esme is gorgeous just from that own description. But what kind of took me by surprise, this all started by wanting to know when did she die? When did she become a vampire? Because I realized I had no idea. And so I ended up Googling Esme Cullen, just trying to find her death day, her death year. And most of this information I found, I'm presuming is from the official Twilight guide. I pulled it off the Twilight wiki page and from Screen Rant. So as far as I can tell, this is the stuff that's been confirmed by Meyer. I am actually waiting for a copy of the illustrated guide to come in from the library, so I will be reading it in its entirety and performing a full book report. But essentially, Esme, which I had no knowledge of this before reading it, and I've read these books since I was 12, Esme was born in 1895 and she died in 1921. And she actually knew Carlisle before her death. He treated her for something when she was 16 years old and somehow knew her and remembered her.
That's a little weird.
It is a little weird, isn't it? That he knew her before she died. And
no, it's weird that he knew her when she was 16.
Yeah, it is kind of weird.
Move on from this.
The sad thing here is that Esme is such an interesting character. So she actually got married very young, got pregnant, but her husband was really abusive. So he left for World War I, was deployed, and she was like, oh, thank God he's gone. And then he came back and through whatever reasons, started becoming abusive to her again. Eventually she fled when she found out that she was pregnant with their child. And she fled because she didn't, my dog just like flung a butter knife off of my bed. Anyway.
Boo, what are you doing?
Boo! Back to Esme. Flees when she learns that she's pregnant, wants to raise the baby away from her abusive husband. Essentially runs away. But the baby dies when it's born. It dies when it's about 2 days old from some kind of lung infection. And Esme actually, trigger warning, attempts suicide after her baby dies. So that's how Carlisle found her. She threw herself off of a cliff. And they essentially thought that she was already dead, brought her to the morgue, and Carlisle realized her heart was still beating, and that's why he changed her, because he recognized her from the 16-year-old girl that she was when he first treated her. So the thing that bugs me is like, why wasn't this mentioned in the book? Why is Edward's story the only one that's so important? Esme, I think, is so fascinating. Her, Rosalie, and Jasper, I love their stories. From the little bits that I know about their stories, I think they're incredible. I think they're really, really cool. And I would have loved to know more about Esme, know why she feels so motherly towards, because it totally makes sense knowing her character, how much she loves her adopted kids, and how much she just wants to be a mom, because that's what she missed out on. She wanted to have this baby, and the baby died, and then she felt she had no reason to live after that. So taking care of these kids, you see her, especially in the 4th book, being very motherly, because this is what she wants to do, what she was meant to do. And I just wish we had explored that more. That being said, I think now it's more of an open and less judgmental space to speak about suicide today. I think people make more of an effort to talk about it in an effort to prevent it. But back then, I don't know. I can't really remember how much of a prevalence it was. I don't think it really was. But I wish we had learned this about her, because, not only is it a metaphor for, oh, you have so much to live for if you're feeling like you're suicidal, as if you're depressed, but I mean, it just adds so much depth to her character, because Esme used to bore me. I feel like I didn't know anything about her. I didn't want to know anything about her. She was a very flat character. I hope you can hear my dog in the background.
Yeah, I can hear him. Yeah. Especially considering that we learned so much about Carlisle. We should learn a similar amount about his life partner. Mm-hmm. Which also, that makes me wonder, like, did they get married immediately after he turned her, or did it take a couple of years?
Yeah.
That's a bit weird.
I have more feelings about Carlisle's story, just whenever you're feeling it.
We'll get to Carlisle in the next chapter, because that's when we get his full story. But one more thing about Esme that you marked down is that Edward says, all this time, Esme's, been worried about me, afraid that there was something missing from my essential makeup. And he's trying to explain why they turned Rosalie, who was intended as a partner for Edward, and then why she's so happy that Edward is with Bella now. What is that about?
I don't know. You would think that the pattern of abusive relationships that both Esme and Rosalie, also Esme and Rosalie have had abusive relationships, and they've been more or less saved by Carlisle.
That's a pattern, man.
Yeah.
That's okay. So not only do the vampire women come from abusive situations, but we were talking a couple episodes ago about, what is her name? The wife of Sam, the werewolf leader.
Yes, Emily.
Yes, Emily, and how he, mutilated her. Okay, does becoming a vampire save you from abuse? Does it make you immune to abuse? And is that why being a vampire is so superior.
But why are all the women being abused?
Yeah.
Like, you could argue that, I mean, Edward and Bella's relationship becomes abusive, especially after New Moon. The way he treats her sometimes.
Yeah, she's possessive and he's ultra protective, in a nutshell. I mean, Alice was in an asylum, wasn't she?
Yeah, she was.
And she was probably abused there.
Yeah. And the way that she saved herself was because she saw visions of Jasper.
Oh, this sets up. Oh, this is a bad pattern. Oh.
Oh, it's a very bad pattern. It's
the
a
men
very,
saving
very
the women
bad pattern.
In every single case.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I hadn't noticed that before.
I'm just now thinking about it. I'm a little stunned.
Thanks, I hate it.
Me too.
Oh,
Thanks,
man.
I hate it. An avocado.
Thanks. Anyway, you don't have to marry your savior.
Hey, let's not.
Yeah, let's not.
Let's save ourselves, ladies and gentlemen.
Let's do our best to save ourselves and really examine what is going on.
We don't need another person to complete us.
Yeah.
To solve our problems.
What is, like, the word for that? I'm thinking, is it a savior complex? I'm thinking, like, the opposite of Stockholm Syndrome, where you, like, fall in love with your captor, but instead you fall in love with your savior.
The savior complex is essentially thinking, like, you need to save other people.
Oh, I have a savior complex. Hero worship?
Something like that.
The Florence Nightingale effect is when a savior falls in love with the person they saved.
That might be it.
I'm on Yahoo Saviors. Yahoo Answers.
Yahoo Saviors!
I'm getting a lot of Jesus-y things. Time to get back to this. So there's a cross on the wall in their house.
Oh my god.
Which, cross that off the list of ways to kill vampires. What's next?
Cross
Garlic?
that out.
Oh, wow. I mean, it makes sense that, like, Stephenie Meyer couldn't make the protagonists fear crosses because that would make her get called anti-Christian.
I mean, but this book, I think, was already called that anyway, so...
You're already in it. But, I mean, that brings us to the end of chapter 15, and the beginning of chapter 16, where we find out Carlisle's full story. You want to summarize that for us?
Essentially, what Carlisle's story is that we find out that he was actually the son of a priest, I think it was a Catholic priest. Anglican priest, who they actually hunted vampires in the early 1600s. So he was born to a very religious family. He was expected to essentially take over as the priest once his father stepped down. He was essentially born and bred for that purpose. But one night, while the townspeople had their pitchforks and torches and were going after a vampire actually attacked Carlisle, bit him, drank his blood, and that's how Carlisle became a vampire. But we learn that he essentially abstained from all things vampiric, actually tried to hurt himself a few times in order to avoid being what he was, until he eventually discovered that he could drink the blood of animals to sustain himself. And that's a very short story. But here's the interesting thing. We don't hear this from Carlisle himself. Mm-hmm. This is not something that Carlisle tells us. This is something that we hear from Edward, and I hate it. I remember hating it when I was a kid. I hate it now. This is cheap writing. This is stupid. This is a lack of developing a voice here for Carlisle, because in the book he's like, oh, I'm just heading out to the hospital. Have a nice day, guys. He was not. He was reading. Like, it's the dumbest thing, because having Edward essentially retell the story again puts this focal point on Edward, when hearing it from Carlisle could have given him so much more depth and emotion. You know, it's his narrative. It's not Edward's. Mm-hmm. It cheapens, I think, the story of it, because how emotional would it have been to hear Carlisle talking about, yeah, I hated myself and I was starving and I couldn't eat and I thought maybe if I died I could survive and da-da-da-da-da. But instead we get this summarized version of, oh yeah, he did this and it was really great. And, you know, we get a lot of like oohing and ahhing over Edward and his storytelling, but at the expense of cheapening Carlisle's character. We don't really learn much about Carlisle until later on, even in the second book. He talks a little bit about how he felt. He talks very briefly about how much he had to work not to hate himself and to become who he was. It's a long time coming.
Yeah. I think with this scene, we really did miss an opportunity to make a flat character come to life on their own terms, because everything is in Bella's terms. Even Edward, his character. We see through Bella's eyes. And so, I mean, in a way it makes sense because everything has to be about Edward. Everything Bella is about Edward now. And anything that isn't about him is irrelevant, which I think is why we have so many flat characters, even the vampires.
I just remember being younger, being like 13 and 14 and writing stories just like in my notebooks or whatever. And whenever I wanted to add something but didn't feel like getting into depth about it, I would say like, this character was here and then they left. And it was like, hey, they're here, but I don't want to go into it, so they're leaving. It just strikes me as very cheap, immature writing. But anyway.
You know, I read this scene in the gender swapped version. In the swapped version, Carlisle is like, oh geez, I forget her name. Oh, there's a BuzzFeed article called I Read the New Gender Swap Twilight Book So You Don't Have To. Oh, this is going to be a handy-dandy article. It's called Life and Death, Twilight Reimagined, and it was released for the 10th anniversary of Twilight. Kareen is Carlisle's swapped name, and the story in the swapped version goes, she's the daughter of an Anglican priest. That's the same. But her father is really passionate about hunting vampires. And one day he gets in too deep with a clan and I forgot her name already. Kareen isn't even there. She isn't being prepped to be anything religious. She isn't really with her father on this quest to destroy the evil and the witches and the werewolves and the vampires in London. And her father gets in too deep with this whole thing and makes an enemy of a vampire. And that vampire comes to their house and turns Kareen into a vampire, makes her father watch as she is suffering under the venom, and kills her father slowly in front of her. So there's no initiative on the female Carlisle's part. She wasn't there at all. She didn't actively hunt vampires like Carlisle did. And overall, she's a more passive character.
I hate that. I hate
it too.
I don't know. I can't pinpoint exactly what I hate about that, but I hate that.
So that was the biggest difference that I've noticed so far in the swapped version, is this drastic change to Carlisle's story. We know from our reading that girls in the 17th century were not passive and didn't always adhere to these strict norms. And so it would be feasible for, I forgot her name again. Oh God. Kareen to have hunted vampires actively.
That also puts her in this position of being like...
she's the damsel in distress, just like everybody else.
Yeah, and the pressure point for all of the male characters are their women. And this may not necessarily be in the same romantic standpoint, but in the way of oh, look... you are here to hurt your father, essentially. That's what we're doing.
Yeah, we're not getting revenge on you. We're getting revenge on him by hurting you.
Exactly.
Just
that is your purpose.
It also gives her less of a mission.
Yeah. The whole purpose of Carlisle is because he was brought up in such a way that it's what drove his story and why he wanted to be a better person.
And he was so active in that. Which brings us to Carlisle as Jesus Christ.
Jesus Christ!
You pointed out that resisting against the sin of drinking human blood and his true nature, which is sinful. There's the allegory for human nature, and it's implied that Carlisle has never tasted human blood, which is kind of like Jesus never sinning. And I could get into a whole thing about what was Jesus. And how are the things he did established as not sinning? And I feel like I would need a PhD in theology to discuss that, honestly. Or I would need to do a ton of reading and probably go back to Augustine, which I'm not sure I want to do at this point in my life. Carlisle is the savior of this whole family, of everyone in this family. They were on the brink of death and he brought them back. And he made it so they defeat death. So in a way, their turning into vampires is kind of like a baptism.
Yes.
And they're still tempted to sin, to drink blood, but the Cullens are superior to other vampires because they resist temptation. And so they're kind of like an order of monks.
And Carlisle builds this following. It's almost like how Jesus was tempted in the desert for 40 days and had to go off by himself and realize that he was strong enough to beat the devil. And then after he succeeds in those trials, he's able to come back and create his disciples. And they're able to follow him. It's kind of in the same way Carlisle spent, 200 years by himself learning and strengthening himself until he created Edward, and in a sense created his first disciple. And then even Edward goes, Edward is not outwardly religious, but in terms of being born in 1901, religion is definitely more prominent. But at the time, there was a very big prejudice against the Catholic Irish people who were coming in. They were seen as loud and drinking. It was the Protestants versus the Catholics, blah, 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 blah. We all know that. And in a way, it's almost like it's carrying over into Edward's life because he rebels from Carlisle at one point. He even tells Bella that he left, essentially. He left and thought he could find his own way. But then he eventually returned to Carlisle in a way that I think is a common theme for Christians and born-again Christians and people who are active in their faith, saying, I came off the path of God. I came off the path that he set for me, but I came back.
Yeah.
It's a very prominent allusion to discipleship and faith and staying within that faith and that set doctrine.
Yeah. It's like Jonah running from God and getting swallowed by a whale.
Yes.
And then deciding to come back.
Yeah, or like Paul.
You mean Peter?
Is it Peter?
Denying Christ 3 times?
Yes, 3 times and then realizing it. And then what's interesting is that Edward uses the word penance. His penance for being a vampire is saving human lives. So, essentially, for being what he is, he has to pay penance for it. In the same way that Christianity plays upon the idea that we are fundamentally sinful creatures, and that we have to pay penance for the original sin of Adam and Eve.
Yeah. I learned a couple of weeks ago that not all people think that Adam and Eve were real people. That was a new thing for me to learn.
Oh, really?
That it might just be a metaphor. And it's not meant to be a story.
So in what way? Explain that to me.
In a way that I always took the story of Adam and Eve very literally.
Oh, really?
Like, these were the first 2 people. The whole fall from grace and the scene in the garden, and especially Eve's punishment being pain in childbirth, I took literally. And so, to get really personal for a second, for years I've taken my own period pain as a punishment from God.
Oh, really?
For Eve's sin. And so it was just a couple weeks ago that I heard someone say, like, Adam and Eve might not be real. It blew my mind.
Because you grew up Church of Christ, right?
Yeah, which is very literal about the Bible.
That's so fascinating to think about, especially seeing as I didn't grow up in the church. Like, that's interesting. Yeah, wow.
But yeah, that's another thing, penance for existence.
Which is something that we're taught to do.
Yeah, which was something that I was doing unconsciously with the way I thought about my period pain. Was like, this is penance.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if Carlisle can actually walk on water.
That's another question I have about this, is what is Carlisle's special power?
Does he have one? Because I think it's stated that not every vampire has one.
But most of them do, right? Does it ever say what his power is?
Not that I know of.
Huh.
I don't think he's supposed to have one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Also, Carlisle is 23 years old.
Yeah, he's my age.
What would you do if you were stuck in your 23-year-old brain forever?
As a human, that would be terrifying, because I would still be young, but then my body would age. And so I guess in the same way, it's kind of terrifying for Carlisle, because his mind is aging, but his body does not. But then again, that might be nice, because you hear people who are elderly saying, I wish I could still do everything I could do when I was in my 20s.
But like, I'm talking about with the maturity that you have now, because with Edward, we discussed how his brain hasn't changed.
Yeah.
Like, his brain hasn't developed. And our brains are, like, mostly developed. I don't think they finish until age 25.
I mean, there's definitely a difference between 17 and 23, but I definitely don't want to be 23 forever.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mostly because I would like to imagine myself stable, not living paycheck to paycheck.
Yeah. Is it just me, or is Carlisle a really mature 23?
Yeah, he is. But he's 300
But he's also
years old.
centuries old, so...
So he's had time.
Yeah. I think I would be more comfortable being 23 forever rather than 17.
Oh, I'm so different than who I was at 17.
Oh, yeah,
definitely.
me too. Here's something else I thought of with Carlisle, was him being kind of like Frankenstein. So it says on page 341, since he couldn't find a companion, he would create one.
Stop. Da, da.
Ugh. Yeah. So Dr. Frankenstein is a man who plays God by bringing a corpse to life, and Carlisle plays God by picking and choosing who to turn into vampires and who to save from death. And vampires are constantly compared to gods. Like, I think in chapter 15, we got yet another comparison to Adonis, and I laughed.
Love it.
And now we've kind of come full circle to Carlisle as Jesus and as God.
Mm-hmm. It's all very interesting. This whole idea of, like, the coven, and they're staying together, and, like, they even try to convince others to live like them. And they're seen as less civilized and seen as lower, which I think, unfortunately is sometimes the case in the Christian faith. People who see those of non-faith as being a little bit lower status, or even being in a different sect of faith. Heavy stuff, man. It's time for baseball.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Ugh. Last episode and this episode have been really heavy.
I know.
It's because we're talking about Jesus.
It's because we're talking about Jesus and we feel guilty.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, do you have a yikes moment for me?
Yeah, I always do.
It.
So mine is on page 315, where they're still at Charlie's house, and they're talking. Bella says something risky, and immediately after she says, "But I examined his gold eyes carefully to make sure that I was forgiven." Oh, fuck no, that's abuse, baby. Oh. It's one thing to look at someone and see if they're really hurt. Mm-hmm. It's another thing to look at them and to see if you are forgiven. What's your yikes moment?
Ooh, first of all, Jasper manipulating Bella's emotions. One.
Wait, he does that?
It's implied that he does, because when she's coming in and meeting them, she's really nervous, and then Jasper comes in and she starts to feel calmer. So either he's intentionally or unintentionally manipulating her emotions to help her relax. But my big yikes moment is girls being bitches. Girls being bitches, guys being dudes. Just, being like, Rosalie's jealous of me? That bitch? And her not even fucking coming to the door to meet Bella. I don't like that. Yeah. Let's all be best friends and be power bitches. Imagine the possibilities of Bella and Rosalie being best friends forever. Yeah. I love it. I'm here for it, and I support it.
Instead, all we have is jealousy, again.
That's different.
But, oh my goodness, you're saying guys being bros reminded me of the screenshot that I sent you yesterday. Where Bo, who's the gender swapped Bella, gives Archie, who's the gender swapped Alice, a bro hug.
Just some guys being dudes.
Just some dudes being guys. Just some guys being gay.
Being gay. Show 'em your dick, Steve. Anyway. Well, that was fun and exciting. I love ending on a Vine reference. Mm-hmm. All right. Do you have any closing thoughts here?
Nope. That was my closing thought.
Dudes being gay.
Yep.
We love it. Well, thanks for joining us, guys, again, for the deep thoughts and, us having existential crises.
Yeah.
One after the other.
It's going to happen every episode now.
I think so, especially now that we're getting more to the meat of the book. There's just more to talk about. We're kind of past the part of bitching about Bella and Edward, and we're more like, wow, look at all the symbolism. Yeah. I love that we get to question why we believe things. It's so exciting.
I'm very excited for that. We are on SoundCloud, which might be where you're listening to this, and we are also on iTunes or the Apple Podcasts app. We are also on Twitter at Let's Unpack Pod, and you can find both of us there.
Yeah, you can find us both. We're both really entertaining, cool people to have and, know in your lifetime. Thanks for listening, and thanks for joining us in this time of crisis, apparently.
Christ is.
I hate you.
I hate myself, too.
All right.
We'll see you in 2 weeks.
See you in 2 weeks. Do it for the vamps.